One study concluded that nutrition counseling is essential for all women during pregnancy, and yet most women do not receive nutrition counseling during pregnancy. Welcome to the Holly Field Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Holly Samuel, and I'm a registered dietitian, board certified in sports nutrition. I'm a certified personal trainer, and I have my master's in health education focusing in eating disorders. And on the Holly Field Nutrition Podcast, we provide you with the nutrition knowledge for all things running, endurance sports, preventing injury, burnout, and more. I'll interview everyday runners and athletes making it happen just like you, along with various professionals and experts in the nutrition space. We'll chat about experiences as a runner, how nutrition and fueling impacts training, performance, and your overall health, and of course, adjustments you can make to be the best runner and healthiest version of yourself that you can be. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show today, everyone. I am excited to be here. I promised this episode was coming. So those of you who are listening are probably those who also listened to maybe my multivitamin episode or have seen my other pregnancy and prenatal related content on Instagram and been like, please cover prenatal vitamins on your podcast. So I'm going to do that today. And this is going to be a longer form supplement myth busting series episode to continue on with that series. And today, if it wasn't obvious already, we are covering prenatal vitamins. We're going to cover what they are, what the claims are, things to look at, who they're for, who they're not for, what I recommend, etc. And like with any episode on this podcast, please remember that this is a podcast. This is not a replacement for individualized medical advice, nor does it constitute a dietitian-client relationship. You should always run any changes or any questions that you're going to make to your own routines by your healthcare provider teams, which should probably include a dietitian if you are listening to podcasts about nutrition so that you can get that individualized advice. So now that we have gotten over the disclaimer, let's dive right in. So, in terms of I've got some notes to help me with this one because this is a huge topic. I'm going to try to do it justice. I think I said I felt the same way about the multivitamin episode. And that's true. I wouldn't say this one's necessarily a bigger topic, but I would say the audience listening to this episode is probably in a more specific and potentially vulnerable state. So again, if you are pregnant, wanting to become pregnant, breastfeeding, etc., listening to this, please, please, please run any questions you have by your team before making changes. And to jump right in, what are prenatals? Typically, a prenatal is just a multivitamin that is geared towards pregnancy. It focuses on incorporating nutrients that are important for conception and pregnancy specifically. So prenatals aren't a ton different than multivitamins, but they do tend to have doses in certain nutrients that are also in multivitamins, but the doses are a little bit higher typically or more specific in prenatal supplements. So these tend to be things like folic acid or folate, calcium, potentially iron, also vitamin D, other B vitamins, choline, calcium, DHA, iodine. Those tend to be the big ones that are in prenatal vitamins. Ironically, there's not really a ton of regulation around if you're calling something a prenatal, it absolutely has to have XYZ in it. Typically, most of them do have at least 400 micrograms of folic acid in them because that is probably one of the biggest reasons why prenatal vitamins were like created. And we'll talk a little bit about why, but sometimes they don't have all these nutrients in them, even though they're important for pregnancy, and sometimes they do. So just like with any other vitamin episode, the theme here is going to be that not all prenatals are created equal, which is kind of crazy because it just seems like it's more specific of a supplement, but like it's for pregnancy, right? But they're really not all created equal. The doses are all super different. I had a friend text me today. She said, "Hey, I'm basically not pregnant for the first time in like 6 years. And I'm done being pregnant. So like, what should I do? Should I come off my prenatal? Should I take a different vitamin?" So, again, we're going to talk a little bit about the context of prenatals here, but typically they're a multivitamin that focuses on incorporating nutrients that are important for conception and also pregnancy, such as folic acid or folate, calcium, iron, vitamin D, B vitamins, choline, DHA, and iodine. They vary quite a bit in terms of not just dosing, like we talked about, but also the vitamin type. So, like the type and form of vitamins that are within these supplements. They also vary quite a bit in form in terms of whether it's like a pill or a gummy or a capsule or a chewable or a powder. So, even seen liquids before. And price. They vary quite a bit in price. You can find prenatals for pretty cheap up to very, very expensive. And same thing, you can find prenatals that are like one pill is one dose or up to like 8 to 10 pills is one dose. So a lot of variety here in product. So I wanted to make sure that I covered that. And one of the reasons why it is recommended pretty much across the board that if you find out you're pregnant, the first thing is like, take your prenatal. Like, tell someone, tell your doctor, and take your prenatal. Those tend to be pretty baseline recommendations when you find out you're pregnant. And part of the reason for that is because prenatals are just an easy way for you to get in some more nutrients when you are pregnant. And again, it's not necessarily completely necessary for everyone 100% across the board if your diet is adequate in the certain nutrients that prenatals contain. But this is a big but. During pregnancy, your nutrient needs increase. And a lot of the times, women also experience appetite decrease, more nausea, more heartburn, more food aversions that they wouldn't typically be averse to when they're not pregnant. A lot of those food aversions tend to be to healthy foods. They may have, you know, more GI symptoms. Maybe you've got a certain medical history. We don't know what your medical status or micronutrient status is during conception and pregnancy. Maybe you are having twins, maybe you're having a single pregnancy, etc. So there's a lot of stuff potentially working against our diet being adequate on its own in, key nutrients that are essential to a healthy pregnancy. And that's where prenatals can come in and kind of just be a little bit of nutrition insurance that you're at least getting certain things. I don't say nutrition insurance lightly though, because again, just because you're taking a prenatal, it doesn't mean that nothing, wrong is gonna happen. It doesn't mean that, oh, because something wrong went, it doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. There's so many different reasons why things can happen during pregnancy. This is a very sensitive topic, and I think the wellness space um, does a really good job talking about pregnancy and talking about how nutrition and lifestyle can really play a positive role in positive outcomes for pregnancy and postpartum. But I think where it really sells people short is almost having like a blamey, shamey, accusatory effect on, oh my God, that totally happened to you, that horrible thing that happened, or complication that happened because you didn't do something correctly. And that's just not the case. There typically has to be a lot of things to cause one specific complication. It could be genetics, it could be lifestyle, genetics, and a certain situation. It's not typically, oh, you took the wrong prenatal, so therefore this outcome happened. Okay. Now, there are research on the benefits of prenatals, and we're certainly going to talk about that because they do have some positive outcomes potentially. So I do want to dive into that. So some of the biggest confusing elements when it comes to prenatal vitamins, I think, are the claims. So we're going to talk about certain nutrients that are found in prenatal vitamins, ones that I definitely recommend looking for in a prenatal vitamin, where to get these nutrients from food, because our bodies know what to do the best with food. And also some myth busting a little bit around different claims, like should we be taking folic acid versus methylated folate if you have the MTHFR genetic mutation, or maybe you don't know if you have this. It's not really a mutation, it's a polymorphism. Maybe we don't know if we have this different polymorphism, so does it even matter? We're going to talk a little bit about the research around that. We're going to talk about claims around like hair health, and again, preventing certain things in pregnancy. So I turned the page on my notes here. So let's dive in. Key nutrients inside prenatals. We touched on some of these already, but the first big one is folate or folic acid. So these are two different forms of the micronutrient, which is a B vitamin, folate. Folate is what's found in food sources like green leafy vegetables, nuts and beans. Fortified grains typically have folic acid in them, whereas whole grains tend to have folate in them. Avocado. These foods tend to have folate in them. Now, folic acid is the synthetic lab created form of folate. Now, it's thought to be a little bit more stable than folate, but there is a lot of back and forth on like which one of these forms is better to take if you're pregnant for a variety of reasons. It should be noted that all of the research on taking folic acid basically is in the realm of it helps prevent neural tube defects in the baby and the fetus. So the research is on folic acid, which is a synthetic form. There's not really much research on folate, which is the active form that you'll find naturally in food sources. And there is a couple of different gene polymorphism variants that the population has under MTHFR. I'm not a geneticist. This isn't my expertise. I'm not going to get into this too much, but basically what the argument is, oh, if some of these people cannot convert cannot convert folic acid to folate, then maybe we should just be consuming folate in food and multivitamins. And while I don't necessarily think this is like a bad claim, because again, if we're getting adequate folate through food sources, that's definitely a positive thing. But it should be noted that the research on folic acid shows that it will help prevent neural tube defects and support neural tube development in the growing fetus in both people with and without these different gene polymorphisms. So if you've got folic acid in your multivitamin or in your prenatal, that's good. If there's folate in there, there's not as much research around that. But given that this is what's found in food sources, that's probably not a bad thing either. So, the consensus that I have and what I've talked to other dietitians who specialize in pregnancy, and are working with pregnant people all the time and who have kind of really stayed on top of this, is that it probably doesn't matter as much as we thought it did several years ago, even if you have MTHFR gene variant. So it doesn't mean you need to really go get tested. It's something you can certainly ask your doctor about. So your prenatal should have folic acid in it or folate, at least 400 micrograms. And you can also get this through leafy greens, vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans, fortified grains, avocado. The US actually went and fortified a bunch of processed grains with folic acid to prevent neural tube defects many, many, many years ago. And it was an effective way to bring down neural tube defect issues in pregnancy. And this is to say that if in the first trimester, when the neural tube is developing, and you're not consuming a ton of leafy greens or nuts and beans or avocado, if you are consuming a lot of fortified grains like I did, like bagels and crackers and cereal and those types of things, know that we are fortifying these foods with folic acid because we know that a lot of people are not maybe going to eat leafy greens or have access to them. And it is a built-in cool public health thing where, we hopefully decreased risk of neural tube defects by doing this. If you take your prenatal too and it's got folic acid in it, you're doing you and your baby good by doing that. So number one is it should have 400 micrograms of folic acid or folate, and folic acid is the one that has been studied to prevent neural tube defects, and it seems to be effective no matter what gene variant you have. That's what the CDC says. So there are specific recommendations if you have had pregnancies or babies in the past with neural tube defect issues to take more, but I'm going to leave that discussion up to you and your healthcare team. But the minimum for healthy pregnancies is 400 micrograms. That should be in most prenatals. Next are a couple other nutrients that I recommend definitely at least looking into increasing your food intake. The next one's iron. So, in the first trimester of pregnancy, a lot's going on. A lot is going on. Typically, this is when a lot of people can feel not great in terms of their symptoms. Not all the times, but again, this is just because your hormones are shifting in a dramatic way. You're increasing your blood volume by quite a bit. And also, you are, really working hard to build a spine, a brain, a neural tube, a heart. You're forming all the main organs of this new human. And it requires a lot of nutrition and micronutrients to do that. So, iron is something I, really want people to think about, especially in the first trimester because of that blood volume increase. So, we can get iron from foods like red meat, poultry, beans and lentils, fortified cereals. And again, if you have a lot of food aversions to some of these things, it might be worth considering getting some lab work done to see if having a supplement would be beneficial. I'm definitely not going to say everyone needs a supplement. So that is to say, if you look at a prenatal vitamin and it has iron in it, um, I would consider getting more individualized advice before just taking iron randomly, because you definitely can overload an iron, and we don't really want to be overloading on anything during pregnancy. But that to say, a lot of active females in pregnancy do tend to have to consider iron. So some of you might know your iron status already going into pregnancy. So basically, just keep tabs on it, get some individualized advice around if you need to take iron or not. Um, and know that if it is included in a prenatal, that might not be the best way to take it because it can be canceled out by some other nutrients that are also in the prenatal. So I do tend to recommend iron separately if you're able to stomach multiple pills, if iron is even needed. Definitely think of food sources too. So this is going to help increase your red blood cell health, support oxygenation, and placenta growth too. So, next nutrient is calcium, which is also very, very important. For pregnancy, we're building more bones, teeth. We're trying to balance out our electrolytes with our rising blood volume. So, very important nutrient. Calcium and iron do tend to block each other's absorption. So, we definitely don't want to be taking these things together, which is one reason why I say probably don't want iron in your prenatal. But calcium can be found in dairy, fortified orange juice, and soy products. And it is not really something I recommend necessarily supplementing unless you have to remove a lot of these food groups for some reason. You're not getting it through the diet. Just because calcium absorption, there's a lot of things that can make that a little bit finicky too. But most prenatals do tend to have a little bit of calcium in them. That's fine. But I would say work on increasing your food-based sources because things like dairy and soy are also going to have a lot of other micronutrients in them and macronutrients that are really important during pregnancy. But if you can't have these things for some reason, again, that individualized advice would be helpful because there's not going to be enough calcium in your prenatal to cover your calcium needs typically in pregnancy. It's usually just a little bit. So that's something to note. Vitamin D, very important in conjunction with calcium for bone health, skin health, eyes, hormones. Vitamin D is really important for a lot of things in both mom and baby. And this comes primarily from the sun, from fatty fish like salmon and sardines and mackerel. It also comes in fortified dairy from certain mushrooms, liver, and egg yolks. If you are already deficient in calcium, it is going to be, in vitamin D, it is going to be incredibly hard to get to get adequate amounts from food. You're going to need a supplement. I do tend to find a lot of pregnant people do need a supplement. So again, knowing your individual levels is going to be the best because then you're going to be able to understand how much you should supplement. Because in prenatals, vitamin D content really varies. It could be like 400 IU, or it could be up to I've seen up to 8,000 IU. So it can really vary quite a bit. So you do want to make sure that you're not getting too much because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. So we can definitely get too much of it and it can be toxic in too large quantities. So want to get individualized on this too. But most prenatals are going to have some vitamin D. If it's enough or appropriate for you is going to depend on the individual. So next, we've got DHA. So DHA is typically found in like fish and fish oil. This I tend to find a lot of people are not getting enough of in pregnancy, and it doesn't get talked about enough. And while it's in some prenatal supplements, it's definitely not in all of them. And even the ones that it is in, it tends to not be in very adequate doses. But DHA is really an important fatty acid for brain development. So this is something that you can look in a prenatal supplement for this. If it is on it, that's typically, a great thing. If it's not, you really want to make sure you're consuming salmon, things that contain DHA in them in the active, omega-3s is what we're getting at, but DHA is an important component of omega-3. And we need to make sure we're consuming that probably at least 2 to 3 times per week. And if you're not, and if you're also like, that's not going to happen, don't worry. You probably want to make sure you supplement this one, and you might need to look at a supplement outside of a prenatal vitamin. I get more into this in my pregnant athlete nutrition course, so I'm not going to get too into it here because there's a lot of other things that you can be looking at. But if you see DHA in a prenatal, that's typically why. If you don't see it in a prenatal and you know you don't consume it a lot in your diet, you got to increase it in your diet or look for a different supplement. Iodine is another micronutrient that increases in pregnancy. So this is another one that we find in prenatals. Pretty often it is for, brain and thyroid health. You can find it in iodized salt, dairy products, and fish. So if you're consuming those things, and I found that in pregnancy, my cravings of these things were like increased. And the body's convenient sometimes in that way. But if you're not consuming a lot of these things, you want it to be in your prenatal. It probably is in your prenatal. Typically iodine's included. Choline is the unsung hero, in my opinion, of micronutrients that are important during pregnancy and the prenatal period. And choline is not always found in prenatal supplements, but it is a very important micronutrient for pregnancy. So in my opinion, you should be looking for it to be included in your prenatal vitamins and or getting it through food. It's found in eggs, beef, chicken, salmon, liver, and also some wheat germ products. So you want to be consuming animal products mostly to get adequate choline. Eggs are a really great source. And it's really important for neural tube development as well, in addition to like folic acid and folate, brain development. And there's a lot of research being done on choline and why it's important. I won't get into that too much here, but again, you might see this in a prenatal supplement. If so, awesome. If not, you probably want to look for it through food or potentially other supplementary sources. Even if it is included in a prenatal supplement, it may or may not be enough. So again, this is a nutrient to consider looking at. Vitamin C is another important one for pregnancy that you'll probably find in a prenatal supplement. I tend to see people go the most overboard with vitamin C. If you're taking too much vitamin C, you may experience like heartburn and GI upset. So do be mindful of this. But vitamin C is important for tissue formation, especially in addition to collagen production, your immune system, iron absorption. It's found in citrus, vegetables, most fruit products, and it'll probably be included in your prenatal as well. Additional things that are probably going to be in your prenatal supplement are other B vitamins like vitamin B6, vitamin B12. You may also find other minerals in there like zinc and magnesium and manganese. These are also all important. So again, your prenatal really is kind of like a multivitamin with specific things that may be more specific doses for pregnancy and conception. It's not always all inclusive of things that I typically would recommend people include. And sometimes it might have too much of some things depending on the case or too little of other things depending on the case. So those are just other micronutrients that also tend to be found in a prenatal. But you can also, again, look for these things through a balanced, healthy, adequate diet and following nutrition guidelines for pregnancy, how to increase your calories appropriately, especially if you're an active pregnant woman, how to make sure that you're increasing certain micronutrients through various food groups, how to make sure you know how to navigate all of this if you don't have an appetite or you're super nauseous and you're really struggling with this, because there are quite a few things that I help clients with to help them navigate that. So all in all, in prenatal supplements, I want to point out quite a few things now that we've kind of gone over the micronutrients that tend to be included in prenatals, some of the, research findings around like folic acid and folate. and when you should start taking these, if you should take them at all, etc. So we probably established that, yeah, I do think most people who want to conceive or are currently pregnant should take a prenatal. Um, I think it's good to say, hey, I know I'm getting enough folate or folic acid through this pill. Um, I'm getting a little bit more micronutrients, but I also think that, if we're going to spend money on a prenatal and we're active, and chances are if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably wanting to be active or are pretty active in pregnancy. There are some special considerations that I have in terms of how to pick out the right prenatal, because too much of a micronutrient is not a good thing. Too little of a micronutrient is not doing you, as much service as adequate amounts could be. So all in all, I do think blood work is really, really valuable in helping you navigate pregnancy. And this is not something that is built in to like the pregnancy check-in process in conventional healthcare models in the US. We do blood work to check on certain things, but typically not the things that I am concerned about as a dietitian who helps pregnant athletes. So typically I'm wanting people to get blood work before they get pregnant. If you can, if you're like, hey, I just would like to know what my baseline is before I'm pregnant, I think that's a good thing to know. Because, too, if you're deficient or there's anything off, then we can try and fix it before you get pregnant so that you just have a better experience in pregnancy. I also, I also think social media does a good job of, again, pointing out these things, but I think sending some people who are maybe more anxious down a spiral by saying, if your blood work is not absolutely perfect, you're not going to get pregnant. Or if it's not absolutely perfect, something bad's going to happen. And again, that's not necessarily true. It's just information that we can gather that may be valuable to know to set us up for positive outcomes within our controllable factors. I know plenty of people who have had perfect blood work and have had fertility issues. I know plenty of people who have had blood work where they're really deficient in a lot of stuff and they have healthy pregnancies. They get pregnant on the first try. Again, this is not the end all be all that I think social media makes it out to be. But it can be really valuable information, because if you're setting yourself up to feel your best during pregnancy and you're controlling your controllables through nutrition, supplements, etc., they can definitely have positive effects. So checking vitamin D, I recommend, B12, folate or red blood cell folate stores, magnesium or red blood cell magnesium stores, your ferritin, iron, and hemoglobin and hemocredit to assess iron status. Vitamin A levels can be helpful. And I recommend, again, getting this baseline before you're pregnant, potentially once during pregnancy, especially if there was anything off pre-pregnancy or you're taking or doing a specific supplement or food intervention to try and fix it, or you're not feeling good. It can be helpful to sometimes repeat these halfway through your pregnancy, and also postpartum, typically around that 12-week mark at the end of the fourth trimester. Again, to just kind of say, where am I at? What do I need to change, if anything? Or, what's going well, what's not going well? Could any of this be within my control to set me up for positive outcomes? So I recommend most athletes get these things checked every 3 to 12 months anyway. Just because a lot of athletes tend to be at risk of having issues with these micronutrients for a variety of reasons that I cover on a lot of other podcast episodes and in my various programs. But blood work can be helpful to make some of this what prenatal should I take recommendation more specific. Because then if you get vitamin D back and it's low, or you get, a couple things back and they're low, you can say, oh, maybe I'd be a good candidate for a more robust prenatal, like a needed or seeking health. Those tend to be very, very robust prenatals. Or maybe you're good. Everything looks pretty optimized. Okay, maybe I don't need something that robust. I can do a Nature Made or a Smarty Pants or a Ritual or something like that. But again, when people ask me about these various brands, what prenatal should I take? I don't know. Chances are, if you're taking any of them, that's probably good, because you're going to get some of those nutrients that are super important for pregnancy that people can struggle to get enough of through the diet. But again, we can get more specific with it. And some of the really, really robust ones, like the Seeking Health and then This Is Needed, which I took needed, by the way, during my pregnancy. So these robust ones can be really useful when they are truly quote unquote needed. They're definitely not appropriate for everyone. They wouldn't be appropriate for someone whose micronutrient status is great, who's not super active, who maybe doesn't have these elevated needs because they're not running or exercising a ton, during pregnancy. So it really does depend on the person, which is why I think blood work can be helpful. And you're going to have to advocate for yourself to get this done because the blood work they do is going to not test pretty much any of this unless you ask for it or there are medical history factors basically saying, hey, we do need to check some of these things. So highly recommend asking or, again, working with your sports dietitian. If you don't have one, you can make an appointment with me at the link in the show notes. But this is important. So blood work, that'll help. One study concluded that nutrition counseling is essential for all women during pregnancy, and yet most women do not receive nutrition counseling during pregnancy. They maybe read a couple blog posts, go online, Google stuff that says, eat this, don't eat that. If you eat healthy, nothing bad will happen. Or if you eat unhealthy, everything bad will happen. If you Google, should I eat anything during pregnancy? Google will probably, especially with the AI summaries now, it'll probably tell you, yeah, absolutely, totally safe. Or in this, like the next bullet point will say, not safe, you're a terrible mother already. Like something like that extreme. There's a lot of information out there. So again, a lot of it is because it truly does depend. And I think people understanding why certain things aren't recommended can be helpful. For example, one thing I hear very often is, oh, one of the first things I want when I'm not pregnant anymore is like sushi. So can I have like sushi immediately postpartum? The reason why sushi typically isn't recommended during pregnancy is because raw fish can be can carry an elevated risk of being contaminated with bacteria that may get you more sick in pregnancy when your immune system potentially is a little bit down, although there is some argument over if that's actually true now in the research. But and it could harm your baby and you essentially because of foodborne illness. It's not that there's ingredients in the sushi that are toxic or anything like that. It's just, hey, there is a risk that this raw fish could have some bacteria on it that maybe would make you and baby more sick and could be really catastrophic in a small percent of chances, right? So if people knew that, I feel like they also might not want to eat it immediately postpartum because you still probably don't want to get a foodborne illness when you're in the hospital postpartum after a baby just came out of your bottom or, your, or if you got a C-section, we probably don't want to be vomiting or having diarrhea. It's probably not what we want. So things like that really tell me that people don't understand why it's recommended not to have these things. And part of what I do in my pregnant athlete nutrition course is explain why, explain what, explain why, explain what I recommend. And things that you should or shouldn't worry about, essentially, especially as an athlete who might be wondering about supplements like creatine or collagen or gels and that type of thing during pregnancy because you still want to run and be active. So we cover a lot more of this in depth. That's beyond the scope of this podcast about prenatal supplements in that nutrition course. But this study did conclude that nutrition counseling is essential for women in pregnancy, but pretty much none of them receive it. I know my OB and midwife team at like my first and second, I know when I called them and told them I was pregnant and scheduled that first appointment, they said, great, take a prenatal. They did not tell me which one. They just said, anyone, take it. And I received no nutrition education at all. They knew I was a dietitian, but still, it's not great. Like they really don't tell you a ton. I think they're assuming people have access to the internet. However, the internet is not that specific and can be terrifying and confusing when you're pregnant and when you're not pregnant. So just wanted to note that. Another thing to consider that can sometimes be found in prenatal supplements is probiotics. Some probiotic strains like L. reuteri and L. rhamnosus have been found to potentially decrease your risk of developing group B strep, which is something they test you for in your third trimester. That if you do test positive for, you do have to take IV antibiotics when you are in labor. So if that doesn't sound appealing, it can be helpful to decrease your risk by taking probiotic supplements. There is research to show that. If you have tested positive in the past, this is something to look into. Again, it's correlation, not necessarily causation, but something within your control. So Your prenatal may or may not have probiotics in them. I know a lot of prenatal vitamin companies do tend to make like women's health probiotics that do have these strains in them, and typically should start, sometime in the second trimester to take these. You also can increase your probiotic rich foods. So like sauerkraut and yogurt and good culture cottage cheese and that type of thing can be helpful. So another thing to think about is the logistics of taking supplements. If you've never been pregnant before and you're a champ at swallowing pills and taking supplements, you might be like, well, that's not going to be a problem. But sometimes what happens to people, especially in the first trimester, is morning sickness slash nausea, all day sickness. And it can actually make taking pills and supplements extremely challenging, especially if you're not someone who's great at taking pills in the first place. It can make you more nauseous and really make it hard. So, something I tell people to consider when they're picking a prenatal is how many capsules are you taking? Like, what is the dose? Like, is it one of these big 8 capsule supplements or is it like a 1 capsule supplement? And are you going to be able to be consistent with that, even if you got stuff working against you? So, if you're someone who does need a lot of pills for whatever reason, and you're having trouble taking them, this could be a time where, hey, while you're nauseous, let's switch you to like a gummy or a powder or something that's more palatable for you, just so you're getting in something. Let's lean on our fortified foods, our liquids, that type of thing. And then when you are feeling maybe more up to it, if the nausea dies down, like in the second trimester, you can switch back to that more robust prenatal if needed. Typically, the gummies are low in nutrients. There are some third-party tests too that have confirmed that a lot of the gummies tend to have even less of what's on the label in them, just because it's really hard to get that much micronutrient content into a gummy and also continue to make it taste good. So, that is something you should consider too. The gummies are better than nothing, but they're definitely typically not like totally complete for most pregnant women. So that's definitely something to consider. And in addition, there was a question that I got that I wanted to include in this episode around 2 questions actually. One, are prenatals more regulated than other supplements? The answer is no. Some of them are labeled with like third-party testing certifications like NSF Sport, Informed Choice. What's the other one? Labdoor, B Core, some of those types of things can be helpful to look for, but no, they're not like more regulated typically than any other supplement that's on the market. So something to think about. We want to look for a high quality one. And 2, the other question was, when should I start taking a prenatal? If you know that you want to become pregnant, or I've even seen people argue if you are of childbearing age and you could become pregnant at some point, it's a good idea to take a prenatal. And mostly that recommendation comes because the neural tube and the heart and a lot of things about the developing baby, they start to develop and happen before you can even really find out that you're pregnant, around like that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th week of pregnancy. You're typically finding out you're pregnant around the 4th or 5th week. So it's a good idea to be taking them at least 3 months prior to trying to conceive, or just kind of haphazardly, essentially, if you are of childbearing age and could get pregnant. So I've seen those recommendations. Typically, again, I'm individualizing supplement recommendations to my clients. And we're basically maybe saying, hey, let's think about folate, folic acid. If you're trying to conceive, let's make sure your red blood cell health status, your iron status are looking better, because that's associated with better outcomes in pregnancy and postpartum. And let's just try to get our ducks in a row, essentially, in a blood work status standpoint and supplements to boot. So that's typically something I'm helping my clients with. They're typically like, hey, I think this is a goal of mine. I want to get pregnant. Is there anything I should do? We start considering that and then change anything as needed once they get that positive test. So typically, if you know you're trying to conceive, you should be taking a prenatal. That's kind of like the blanket statement answer for that. If you found out you're pregnant and you're like, I definitely have not been taking a prenatal. You don't need to freak out. It's okay. Start taking one as soon as you can and try to optimize your food intake of all the micronutrients I discussed. Let your healthcare team know, just so they're all in the loop together. But again, the recommendation is take it before you're pregnant if you can. But if you didn't do that, it doesn't mean that everything's going to go wrong. It's just something we want to control if we can. Another misconception is that like prenatals are only for pregnancy. Definitely not true. I just said, they could be for conception. I've also recommended people take them postpartum, especially if you're breastfeeding. I've also just recommended them because the micronutrient profile of certain ones meet someone's needs via the blood work we've received. So again, prenatals don't mean you're going to become pregnant. They don't get you pregnant. And they're not just for pregnancy, but they are designed specifically, typically for pregnancy. So again, kind of a misnomer there. Yeah, they're a good idea for pregnancy, but it doesn't mean that they're going to like make you pregnant or anything like that. So in terms of prenatal supplements, I really think I covered what I want to cover for this episode. I'm not going to give specific brand recommendations because, again, it really does depend on what you need. So my biggest recommendation would be to find out what you need. Take any prenatal if you're pregnant. Again, contact your healthcare team to see if it's the right one for you. Go over lab work to make things more specific and tailored to what your needs are. And if prioritize food as much as you can first, because again, our bodies are going to do a lot of things with food because food is very complex. It contains a lot of different micronutrients and macronutrients, and we need all of that, especially when we're pregnant. So hopefully this was helpful. If you are wanting more specifics on how I go about recommending prenatals for people, how to kind of look through blood work and understand, what you should be thinking about prenatal and supplement wise, what sports nutrition supplements I do or do not recommend during pregnancy, what to think about for nutrition during your first, second, and third and fourth. Don't forget about the fourth trimesters, for trying to conceive, and also how to troubleshoot things like nausea and heartburn and trapped gas and bloating and a lot of GI discomfort during pregnancy. How to reduce your risk of group B strep, how to improve your blood sugar control and things to think about for, testing for gestational diabetes and that type of thing. And it's evidence-based. And we've got also a expert who talks about exercise recommendations, a pelvic floor PT who talks about exercise recommendations during pregnancy. If you want more support in like the bigger realm of nutrition past just prenatal vitamin supplement episode on a podcast, check out the link in the show notes. I would highly recommend my pregnant athlete nutrition course. It is a several series course that walks you through your entire pregnancy and basically helps you adapt your nutrition to what you need during that time. I cover certain things that, I tend to have clients think about. And you can also always schedule like a one-on-one review session with me as well to review lab work if you have specific questions. So I will link to the pregnant athlete nutrition course below, and also the lab work review session with me. And as a bonus, if you do sign up for the pregnant athlete nutrition course, you will also get access to my breastfeeding nutrition course, and fourth trimester support nutrition course. Both of those classes are add-ons to the pregnant athlete nutrition course. So make sure you check those out. If you are pregnant or trying to become pregnant, I wish you the best. I hope you have a good experience and a smooth journey. It can be quite the roller coaster. So no, you're not alone. And if you need anything, let me know. But I hope this one was helpful. Share it with someone if you think they'd benefit from it. And until next time, happy fueling and happy running.